Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Financial independence is paramount. My mother always said, money is power.
Did she?
That was a quote. I started with a quote today.
Kristen's quote, God.
Yeah, and I picked one from Oprah because she is wealthy, successful, and powerful now.
And defied all the odds to get there. I think she's a classic case of someone who probably spent her entire life being told that money was not for her, that she was probably cut off from a lot of financial systems. She didn't grow up with a lot of money. So I feel like she is someone who's broken through all that and probably has a very powerful message for the rest of us in the importance of money.
We have obviously come from a fintech and investing platform called Hatch. And so we spent years in this space encouraging women to get involved and amongst it and to great success. And so we thought that we would actually look at 5 surprising facts about women and money this week.
And before you tune out because you hate talking about money, this is actually one of my bugbears. It's the number of times I talk to women and they say, I just don't care about money. Because you do. And I had this conversation literally 2 weeks ago with someone who was starting a business, and she's so cool, and she was very purpose driven, and she's changing the way we do a certain thing. I'm not going to mention who she is. And she was like, but I don't really care about money. And I was like, how did you buy your business? How did you buy your land? How did you buy the freedom to be able to start this business? You care so much about money, but we are socialized to pretend we don't and to relate it with greed or wanting more than our fair share, which is something that women are very come down harshly on when we feel like we feel like we can't have more than our fair share. So don't turn off the podcast if you feel the urge right now, because we might change your mindset a little bit on this.
Well, I think we will. There is a lot of emotion tied up with money, and much of that is negative. And I think if anything, these 5 points will put women in a really positive light and at minimum give you hope. And they say for an investor, the best time to start was yesterday, but the second best time is today. So that relates to anything with money. Forget what's happened. You can start fresh today, but actually there are really fun facts as well.
Yeah, they are, because I think we are told all sorts of myths about women and money and how we're not very good at it. But actually what we'll find throughout the next 30 minutes is maybe it's not us at all. Shocking.
All right, you take away with the first one.
Okay, well, one thing I find really fascinating is we're often told women aren't very good with money, but the truth is we've actually been cut off from most financial systems, which we'll go into in a bit. But what women have managed to do throughout history, even if we didn't have formal access to bank accounts, we didn't get to control property, we were effectively the property of our husbands, is women have always found a way to store and transfer wealth outside of these formal financial systems. And we may think that diamonds are a girl's best friend because we love glittery, sparkly things. But actually, one of the reasons why women really love and collect jewelry is that it's an investment. It is a very easily portable investment that you can travel with. So you can take it where you need to go if you're leaving a bad relationship, if you are forced out of your home, if you are moving overseas. It's very easy to carry with you. It's very tangible. You can pass it down to someone. So it's something that you can store and pass to people. And it's something that women have done despite not having access to formal institutions. We have figured out a way to collect wealth, which in my opinion, completely blows up this belief that we're not good at it, because we've succeeded despite not having access to formal systems.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting reading back on the cultural history of dowries and how jewelry was transferred between family and family. And it went both ways for a number of centuries. But ultimately, women who came into possession of jewelry used it as financial security, particularly in the days where they couldn't work and their husbands were ill or died. There's still cultures today, particularly in India and Asia, that pass down gold jewelry to the daughters, or we know that heirlooms and whatnot can be passed down as well. And very much so, they are used as financial security.
I know there's been, when we were looking it up over the weekend, there's been a bunch of examples of women who've had to escape bad relationships, even in Western culture. I think even Jewish people back in the Nazi times were sewing jewelry into their coats,
Yes,
because
diamonds,
you could
yeah.
travel with it and hide it. So this is a form, I mean, it's so much more than beautiful glittery things. It's a form of looking after yourself.
Yeah. The second surprising fact is that women were formally excluded from the financial system for far too long. For example, in the US, American women couldn't obtain credit cards without a male cosigner until 1974. Here in New Zealand, it was 1979. I mean, it's so crazy. In the UK, women couldn't apply for a mortgage until 1975. So thank goodness for the women's movement in the 70s. But really up until that point, other than jewelry, there wasn't a lot that we could own.
Now it's 2024. That's 50 years. That's 50 years ago. So a bunch of us who are alive today were alive back when women couldn't own their own money. That's today. Like, it blows my mind how recent this is, that we got access to things that we should have had all along.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of other stuff in there too, with that the finances were separated, or, you know, when women leave, who gets to keep the house and all that sort of stuff. I think the other thing with these formal financial systems is what happens, and this happens with a lot of cases where laws change and suddenly we're granted access. So legally we have access, but as we tend to find, legal change doesn't necessarily force cultural change.
Yeah.
So even today, we are now largely full participants in the financial systems around the world. But I find this a really fun fact. 70 to 90%, depending on the study, of women leave their financial advisors after their husband dies. Do you know why?
Probably because they have felt ignored.
Yeah, I think they've been completely ignored and spoken down to and patronized. And so what that leads to is substantial behavior change. They go, why am I staying with you? So financial advisors at the moment are really scrambling to try and get more financial advisors, because the financial industry, shock horror, is dominated by men talking in jargon, talking about it in a way that does not feel inclusive to women. So a lot of financial advisors, and there's some fabulous ones around the world, are really trying to bring on a lot more women advisors, because they recognize that after these years of being ignored and overlooked, these women who now have a lot of money are wanting to go to someone who's going to look after them.
Well, and I love that women are taking advantage of this, women financial advisors, and I can think of a few that are specifically growing female advisories for women, which is amazing. So I do love that.
Yeah, and then I think the last one that I've been contemplating a bit is, while the laws again have changed, when it's only 50 years old that we were allowed to own credit cards, that's a lot of change required. So what happens is the default tends to still be, if you are a woman in a relationship with a man, they by default pick up the finances. Like, they by default will have the credit card and manage the investments. And it's not because women are formally not allowed to. It's just that that's just what we've seen modeled and what the default. And I think that's another thing that kind of really reinforces this idea of, like, we don't question it often.
Oh, well, I recall that actually our entire marriage, all of our bank statements are like, start with my husband's name and then mine. And so my name ultimately is cut off in online statements. Yeah, I know. And then also, and this was like, drove me crazy, was my husband, even though it was a joint credit card, because his name was the lead owner of the credit card, he got all the air points and I'm the one that's traveling, and it drove me crazy. And I tried to call Visa and the bank and say, can you just flip it, because I'm the one that can benefit from these air points, not my husband who does not travel. And they couldn't. We had to, if we wanted to get me to benefit from the points in a joint credit card, we had to cancel it, and I had to open it in my own name. The whole thing's insane. So
yeah, I mean,
don't
the
get
other
me
one
started.
we found recently in a relationship with a woman is we bought a car together. And when you register a car, only one person can be the owner. And I was thinking back, and I see it all the time where it's like, dad's car, mum's car. And you notice that the men always get the like really nice car and the women have the runaround.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that is because you can only put one
One,
person on the
yeah.
car registration. And so you just end up with the woman getting the second car. And I'm just like, these little things that aren't formal anymore, but they reinforce this idea of women are not owners of things and investments and wealth. And I think, yeah, that's something we should be really conscious of. Because the third thing we want to talk about today is we often get told as women that we are not great at investing. And there's this widespread belief that women aren't as good at maths. And there's actually been a huge amount of research done on this. And there's very little to no difference. And a lot of the difference that they do find, they feel like can be put down to socialization and like boys growing up thinking they're good at maths and girls not. But what we found is that women actually outperform men.
Yeah. And there have been studies. I know a big study in the US. Actually, they do it every year. This company called Fidelity Investments. They find that the women outperform the men, and it's almost 1% they outperform. And some of the findings...
And 1%'s a lot, by the way. If you think 1%'s not a lot,
year.
over the course of a life, 1% makes a substantial difference.
Yeah, because that is 1% a year. But the reason that they found that women were better investors were for a few things. One, they were humble enough to go and seek financial advice or do their research. So it wasn't off a hot tip or buying the latest hot thing, getting in on some of the trends and the...
meme stocks.
Meme stocks that we were seeing. So women tended to be more open to sensible advice. I'm going to say sensible. The second is that once we made a decision and invested, we're really happy with that decision because we'd done the research. And so as the share markets fluctuate, the stock markets fluctuate as they do, there was no panic or immediate sell or trading. And so when we don't trade to try and take advantage of the peaks and troughs of the share market, number one, we avoid transaction costs. But number two, studies have shown that no one is smarter. No one can beat the stock market. Therefore, you kind of minimize your oops-a-daisy losses. And so women historically have had cooler heads related to investing, and that prevails when it comes to investing.
And for anyone who is not across share markets and stock market, exactly the same thing. This is a great example of all the jargon, and we have to use different words. And trading is just buying and selling shares quickly. So rather than buying shares like you'd buy shoes and hold on to them, you buy the set of shoes and then you sell it the next day to try and buy a better pair of shoes, and then you sell them. And sometimes you get more expensive shoes and sometimes less expensive shoes. And that's what that holding thing minimizes, that you're trying to gamble with. Is the sale happening today or is it not happening today? And I think with that, just to wrap up the women are better investors part, one of the worst words in investing, in my opinion, is risk. We often talk about risk when it comes to investing. And when in normal life we think about risk, it's about falling off a ladder and hurting ourselves or crashing down a ski slope or whatever. We have this really strong association with risk being a bad thing. When it comes to investing, risk is actually just your chance to grow money over time. So it's often the more growth potential, there's also the more risk that it may not grow. And what has ended up happening is we often talk about women as being risk adverse, which really leans into all our fears about wanting to avoid bad things happening to us and being scared of physical danger and all of that sort of thing. But what we actually are is risk aware. And that leads to what you're talking about with women do their research. We are aware that when we invest our money, there is a chance that money will drop in value or even the company might fold. And so that's actually, that risk awareness is an incredibly powerful skill, but we're told we're risk averse, and that's a problem with us.
Yeah. And that's why often women have been depicted as being able to budget and stretch a dollar, whereas men have been depicted as taking the risk and investing and taking advantage of the growth in the share markets. However, the great news is that studies have shown when women invest, again, we outperformed. Underline that surprising fact. So don't be scared of it.
Yeah, don't be scared of it. And there's lots of great companies out there. We did a podcast with The Curve recently.
Yeah.
They're one of the many groups. There's Girls That Invest. There's places around the world. We really encourage you to look them up because they really break down all the jargon and just make you realize that you actually do have a place in the financial world and the investing world.
The fourth surprising fact is that carries on nicely from this is, in fact, we are better savers. And there's also been a number of studies come through from banks that can actually see the gender of their customer base. And they have found that, number one, there is less spending per month going out of women's bank accounts. And number two, we actually have more of a buffer than their male customers. And there have been a number of banks that did that. I remember ASB 2 years ago did that study, and I was actually kind of surprised about it, because there's been this long held belief and jokes and innuendo from, oh, the wifey has gone out to buy shoes, or that we can't, we don't save money, we love shopping and all of these things. But the banks have actually revealed the data in that not only do we have more of a buffer in our bank accounts, but we spend far less than I think what is thrown around.
Yeah, and I think there's two reasons for that. One is that women's spending is more visible. We spend on a lot of smaller things, whereas men are more likely to spend a lot on a less number of things. The second thing is women actually globally control about 85% of spending. And I talked to a woman once, and it made my blood boil, that her husband would make these little remarks to their kids about mummy being a spender. Look at mummy out shopping again. She was the person buying the kids' clothes, paying the school fees, buying the groceries. That was her spending, in quotation marks. So he had created this perception within their family that she was a frivolous spender because she actually took care of all the household expenses.
Right.
And she never spent any money on herself. She never did that. And I just wonder if there is that thing, because women are the ones out doing the grocery shopping and out making sure the kids are clothed and fed and bills are paid, that yes, of course, we are parting with money, but it's not frivolous. And I think it's allowed the social idea that we are shopping more. But actually, yes, when push comes to shove, we earn less, but we save more, which is just like outstanding financial control.
There must also be some level of bias when it comes to our decisions with spending, because I know that there of course women are known to do spa getaways and have weekends away with friends, and we do spend our money on self-care. It could be wellness, it could be time with friends, and that's a thing. And that is often, maybe it's visible or maybe it's talked about. When I look in an average garage in New Zealand, the amount of bikes and skis and vehicles and, I don't know, remote control, whatever, and gadgets and drones that the husband, we're not talking about that.
I reckon that comes down to another bias, which is the same as in the movies. If you go to an action film, it's frivolous and it's silly and it's ridiculous, really. Like, they are ridiculous, but it's seen as sort of serious. Whereas if you go to a chick flick, it's seen as silly because it's a men primarily go to the action films. I think those stats are changing, and women primarily go to chick flicks in quotation marks. So we have this idea that men's stuff is serious and women's stuff is frivolous. There is no difference between joining a golf course and going out to a day spa. But perception wise, we see one is more serious than the other.
So true. And our final surprising fact is that female founders, Nat and I would fall into that category, we deliver better return on investment. So it is well-known fact in the world that women only receive 2% of VC venture capital funding. So often investors will invest in a startup in order for it to grow, and they get a piece of the pie when it grows. There's a win-win there, of course, in taking investment and growing a business. But women only receive 2% of global venture capital funding. However, when we do receive it, all the studies, again, have shown that we do more with that money. Not only are we better caretakers of that money, female founders are more likely to reinvest profits back into the business for sustainable growth. But ultimately, we are able to stretch that invested dollar further. And many studies have shown that.
There's two things I wanted to add to that. I read this book once on micro investing. And it was one of the people who invented it. And by the end of their philosophy was only to invest their money. And these are small bits of money to help people in developing countries set themselves up economically. They would only invest it in women, and they'd only invest it in groups of women, because every time they did that, they got a much better result. So they actually used that data. What I find really fascinating about the startup world, which is sort of the second point, is that despite knowing that women outperform when they're invested in, most of the narrative around this and most of the initiative around this are on helping women pitch better, helping women get more confident with learning how to get funding. And very few, and I've noticed this real pushback recently from women just saying, just write the checks. The problem isn't with us. It's not that we're not confident. It's not that we pitch badly. We've outperformed. It's proven beyond a doubt. Just give us the money. The problem doesn't sit with us. It sits with venture capitalists. And you do see, I saw this and this is probably a little bit too rough, but I did see something on LinkedIn the other day about when you actually look at where a lot of venture capitalists come from, they come out of the startup world, or they come out of these really great big incubators and accelerators. So that's their network. So they trust they trust them, and they speak the same language.
Yeah.
And so they have this incredible bias.
It's the same meritocracy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is you're rating people based on what you're comfortable with and where you're comfortable putting your money. And a few things, actually, that the stat that I found, Boston Consulting Group study found that women-run startups deliver twice as much per dollar invested than those founded by men. So I mean, I'm sorry, but that is excellent return on investment. And I know that when we were in the States last year, we met an angel investor. He said, I took a bit of a risk in his eyes, and I invested in a women's startup. It was my first women's startup in my portfolio. And my goodness.
And he did it sort of as a charity, didn't he? He was like, I just felt like I should help her out.
Yeah, I'll just punt her a bit of money. And he said she outperformed my entire portfolio. Yeah. And he was on the lookout. He came straight to us, didn't he? But he was on the lookout to invest in women. Yeah. So, I mean, surprising fact.
They're no longer surprising to us because I feel like we're constantly going on about them. But I think this is such a great example when it comes to money, because I think there is this real everything to do with women. The narrative around the problems is often the exact opposite of the reality. And so I think when it comes to money, if you've completely disconnected from it, if the idea of looking at your bank account is scary, if you've handed over financial reins to your husband, doesn't matter. Like, none of that stuff matters. What does matter is that we actually start thinking as a first step about these mindsets and really challenging our in quotation marks again, gut feeling on it, because that gut has been informed by years and years of conditioning that probably has led you to think quite differently about money than how you should think about money.
Yeah, love it. If you're listening to this podcast after mid-August 2024, in Wellington on August 13th, come and join us at the Generator. You can find tickets on the powrsuit.com site. Go to About. You'll see all of the events we have coming up. And on August 13th, we have a live recording of this podcast. Come and join us in Auckland. It's on August 20th.
Come along. We've got quite a crowd forming already. We'll be doing this, but in front of you with some cool topics.
Yeah, we'll see you then. Take care, everyone.
Bye.